Margaret Calloway tore the letter in half before the station master finished reading it aloud. The crowd went silent. She took both pieces, folded them once, and pressed them into the man's breast pocket like she was filing a receipt she didn't want back. "I didn't travel 900 miles to be handed condolences and a stage ticket to nowhere," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands did, but she pressed them flat against her skirt, and nobody saw. The man who'd sent for her was dead. Her savings were gone. She had 43 cents left in her coin purse. Before we go any further, if this kind of story finds something true in you, something you've carried a long time without a name for it, please subscribe to this channel and hit that bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Cartero, New Mexico Territory, August of 1883, and find out what happens to a woman who refuses to disappear. The station master's name was Gerald Fitch, and he had the look of a man who had delivered bad news so many times it had stopped costing him anything. He pulled the letter from his apron pocket, with the casual reach of someone handing over a receipt for grain, smoothed it against his palm, and read the pertinent line the way a man reads a weather report. Robert Holt, rancher, age 41, deceased of fever, 3 weeks prior. Buried already on his own land, as was practical. Meg had listened to every word with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight as a fence post. She was sitting on her trunk. The trunk was heavy. 2 ledger books, her grandmother's sewing kit, 3 dresses, and every document she owned, folded flat and wrapped in oilcloth, because she had learned, the hard way, that papers got lost when you weren't careful with them. When Fitch finished reading, she stood, smoothed her skirt, held out her hand. He gave her the letter without thinking, and she tore it in half before he registered what she was doing. She folded both pieces once, pressed them back into his breast pocket, and said what she said. Fitch blinked. "Ma'am, I understand you've had a shock." "I haven't had a shock," Meg said. "I've had a setback. There's a difference." "Be that as it may, there's a stage going back to Santa Fe day after tomorrow. Mrs. Dunbar at the boarding house can—" "I'm not going to the boarding house." Meg picked up her carpetbag. "And I'm not going back to Santa Fe." Fitch's mouth opened and closed. Around them, the platform crowd had stopped pretending to have other business. A woman in yellow calico leaned toward the woman beside her. A man from the feed store crossed his arms. 3 boars who'd been chasing a dog stopped chasing it. "Miss Hartley," Fitch started. "Mrs. Calloway," Meg said. "I'm a widow. I've been a widow for 2 years. I answered Robert Holt's advertisement in the Cincinnati Gazette because he needed someone to run a household and keep his books, and I was qualified to do both. The fact that he died before I arrived doesn't change what I'm qualified to do. It changes considerably what you're here for," Fitch said. "Only if you're thinking about this the wrong way." The woman in yellow calico whispered something. The woman beside her covered her mouth. Meg heard it anyway. She had good ears, and she had learned not to let her face respond to things her ears picked up. In Cincinnati, after Thomas died and the creditors came, and his business partner fled with the accounts, she had heard a great many things said in low voices by people who thought low voices were the same as private voices. She had learned to keep her chin level and her expression neutral, and her hands, above all, still. She kept them still now. "There a hotel in this town?" she asked. Fitch hesitated. "Dunbar's is the only—" "Then I'll stay at Dunbar's tonight. Tomorrow I'll speak to whoever manages Robert Holt's estate. He had land. Land doesn't disappear because the man holding the deed does." "Mr. Pruitt handles estate matters in this county," Fitch said, and something in his voice changed when he said the name. A flattening, like a man careful not to step on a loose board he knows is there. Meg filed that away. She filed things away the way she organized ledgers, automatically, without ceremony, because you never knew which number would matter until it did. She picked up the handle of her trunk. It was too heavy to drag far, but she dragged it anyway, 3 feet toward the edge of the platform, until she had to stop. No one moved to help. The man watching from the far end of the platform had been there the whole time. He stood with his back against the depot wall, and his hat pulled low, and a coil of rope over one shoulder. And he had not moved or spoken or looked away since Meg tore the letter. He was not a large man, but he held himself like someone who had learned to take up exactly the space he needed and no more. His left leg had a slight hitch when he shifted his weight, a stiffness that came and went like weather. His name was Walter Durham, and he had come to town for fence wire and a new axle pin, and nothing else. He had told himself that before he left the ranch. He had told himself that on the 8-mile ride in. He was going to get the wire and the pin and the mail, if there was any, and he was going to come straight back without speaking to anyone beyond what the transaction required. He watched Margaret Calloway drag her trunk 3 feet across the platform, stop, set her jaw, and try again. He pushed off the wall. "Ma'am?" He set the rope down on a bench. He was in front of her before he'd decided to move there, which was a thing that had been happening to him since he quit the agency. His body making decisions his mind was still arguing about. "I'll get that." She looked at him. Her eyes were gray, the particular gray of iron left in rain, and they moved across his face with the same efficiency she'd applied to everything else on this platform. Taking inventory, assessing. "I don't know you," she said. "Walt Durham." He didn't offer his hand. Both of hers were on the trunk handle. "I've got a ranch northwest of town, 8 miles. You need somewhere to be that isn't a boarding house." Something behind her eyes shifted. Not warmth. More like a door opening a crack to see what was on the other side before committing to anything. "Why?" she asked. It was the right question. He respected it. "Because you tore that letter up, and I could use someone who does things like that." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." He gripped the trunk handles. "I've got 30 head of cattle, a vegetable garden gone to weeds, and a set of ledger books I haven't opened in 14 months because the numbers stopped making sense to me after my wife died. If you can keep books, you can earn your keep. Separate quarters. My word on that." The woman in yellow calico said something that carried. 2 words. Meg didn't look toward it. Walt did. His jaw went tight. Fitch had drifted back to the ticket window. The feed store man was still watching. One of the boys had started chasing the dog again. 14 months, Meg said. "Eliza, November of last year." She was quiet for a beat. Then, "How much of it do you understand? The ledgers?" "Enough to know something's wrong. Not enough to know what." Her hands had gone still on the strap of her carpet bag. Not loose. Still. The way hands go still when a mind is working. "I'll need to see them," she said, "before I agree to anything." "Fair enough. And I'll need use of a desk." "There's a table." "A table is fine. And I sleep outside, fair warning. The cabin, I don't do well with walls, since Eliza." He said it flat, without apology. "Loft's yours. Clean. I kept it clean." Meg looked at him for a long moment. On the street beyond the depot, a horse stood at a hitching post, ears forward, watching them both with the calm attention of an animal that had seen a great deal and formed no strong opinions about any of it. "All right," Meg said. They loaded the trunk into the wagon bed without ceremony. Walt took the heavy end. She took the other. When he offered his hand to help her up to the seat, she looked at the wagon wheel, gripped the iron step, and climbed herself, managing the carpet bag without dropping it. He walked around to the driver's side and didn't comment on it. They rolled out of Cartero with the sun past noon and the dust rising gold behind the wheels. The woman in yellow calico watched from the post office doorway. Fitch had disappeared. A man Meg didn't know stood in front of the saloon with his thumbs in his belt, watching the wagon go. She didn't look back. Walt clicked his tongue at the mare, and the wagon found its rhythm on the rutted road. The prairie opened up around them, brown grass and red rock, and a sky so blue it looked painted. Grasshoppers kicked up from the weeds on both sides. A hawk hung on a thermal to the west, working in slow circles without seeming to move at all. "Pruitt," Meg said. "The man Fitch mentioned. He handles estate matters. He handles a lot of things in this county." The same flatness she'd heard in Fitch's voice. Deliberate. Cautious. "You don't like him." Walt's hands adjusted on the reins. "I don't trust him. There's a difference." She filed that, too. "Robert Holt's land," she said. "What happens to it now?" "Pruitt will inventory the estate, file the paperwork, find an heir, or sell it to cover debts." A pause. "If there are debts." "You're not sure there are." "I'm not sure of a lot of things about how Robert died." He said it like a man who had been thinking about a thing for a while, without saying it out loud. "He was healthy in June. I saw him at the feed auction. He bid on 2 bulls. Men don't bid on bulls if they're planning to die." Meg turned that over. "Fever can move fast." "It can." He didn't say anything else. A mile passed. 2. The road bent north around a dry wash, then south again. The mare set her own pace. Walt let her. "How long were you a bookkeeper?" he asked. She looked at him. "You didn't ask if I was one." "Your hands gave it away. Ink stain, right thumb, where the pen rests. Same place every time." He kept his eyes on the road. "My wife had it. She kept the books before. 7 years, Meg said. "I kept my husband's accounts. Textile company. 14 employees at the peak." A beat. "He died 2 years ago. Industrial accident. The press in the finishing room." She said it the way she had learned to say it, cleanly, without any parts sticking. "His partner took the accounts and left for St. Louis. I spent 8 months trying to recover what I could through the courts. I got $40 and a letter of apology from a judge who meant well." "And then you answered an advertisement." "I answered 6 advertisements. Holtz was the only one that mentioned needing someone to run the books." Walt nodded once, said nothing for a while. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had both run out of easy things to say some time ago, and had made peace with the harder kind. The ranch appeared as a low shape against the horizon, then grew. A cabin, a barn, a corral. A cottonwood behind the cabin, large and old, its leaves showing the first yellow edge of late summer. Walt pulled the mare to a stop in front of the porch. Meg looked at the cabin. The windows were clean. One of them had a crack along the lower pane, mended with a strip of cloth and what looked like pine pitch. The porch needed sweeping. A set of spurs hung from a nail by the door, tarnished, unworn. "It's not much," Walt said. "I didn't come west for much," Meg said. "I came west for different." She climbed down and waited while he unloaded the trunk. He carried it up the porch steps without asking and set it inside the door. She followed him in. The cabin was 1 room and a loft. The stove was cold. The table was large, solid, made from planks that had once been something else. Wagon boards, maybe, cut down and refinished. On the table, in the far corner under a cracked lantern, was the thing she'd been told about. 2 ledger books, brown leather, thick. And beside them, something else. A letter, still sealed, the wax broken on one side where it had been opened and then pressed back. The return address stamp read, Dorado County Land and Tax Office. Edgar Pruitt, Assessor. She didn't touch it, but she looked at it. "Loft's up the ladder," Walt said from the doorway. "I'll get you water." He went out. His footsteps crossed the porch, descended the steps, crossed the yard toward the well. She heard the rope creak and the bucket drop. Meg stood alone in the cabin. She looked at the letter. She looked at the ledger books. She looked at the spurs hanging by the door through the window, at the cottonwood in the yard, at the particular stillness of a place that had stopped expecting people to come into it. She unbuttoned her left cuff, rolled it back to the elbow, reached into her carpet bag and found her pen case, set it on the table beside the ledgers. Then she went to the ladder and climbed up to see what she was working with. The loft was narrow. A pallet, a folded quilt that had been washed recently. She could smell the lye. A small window facing west. A hook on the rafter for a lantern. Clean, as he'd said. Kept with the attention of someone who had wanted it kept without knowing why. She came back down. Walt was at the table, setting a tin cup of water beside the lantern. He'd lit it. The flame pushed the late afternoon light back to the corners. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, started to move toward the door. "Mr. Durham." He stopped. She pointed at the letter with the broken seal. "When did that come?" He turned, looked at the letter like a man looks at something he has been not looking at for a while. 3 weeks ago." "Have you responded?" "I've been thinking on it." "What does it say?" His jaw worked. He picked it up, held it out to her. She took it, unfolded it. The language was formal, the kind of formal that was designed to obscure rather than clarify. She had seen this kind of language before. She had spent 8 months reading it in Cincinnati, in letters from lawyers and judges and county clerks. Letters written to say a great deal while meaning as little as possible. She read it twice. "They're claiming you owe back taxes on the eastern 40 acres, she said, "going back to 1880. I paid those taxes. Do you have the receipts?" "Somewhere." He didn't sound certain. "You need to find them." She set the letter back on the table, face up, so she could still see it. "This notice gives you 30 days to produce proof of payment, or the land goes to public auction for recovery of the debt." She looked at him. 30 days from the date on the letter. He looked at the date. His face didn't change, but something behind it did. A stillness that was different from the stillness he'd been wearing all day. This one was the stillness of a man doing arithmetic he didn't like the answer to. "That was 3 weeks ago," he said. "Yes, which means I've got 10 days, Meg said, give or take." Walt set his hat on the table, ran his hand through his hair. The gesture was the same as a man putting his fist through a wall, except his hand came back down without touching anything. "The receipts are in the barn," he said, "in a box, with a lot of other things I put in a box after Eliza." She didn't say she was sorry. He didn't look like he wanted that from her. "We'll find them tonight," she said, and pulled the nearer ledger book toward her and opened it to the first page. Walt watched her. Her pen was already out. She was turning pages with a particular efficiency of someone for whom numbers were not abstract. They were a language, and she was fluent, and she was already reading something he couldn't read. "You sure you want to get into this?" he said. "It might be nothing. Could be a clerical error." Meg ran her finger down a column of figures, stopped, ran it back up. Her expression was the same as it had been all afternoon. Level, contained, giving away nothing she hadn't decided to give. But her pen went still on the page. "Mr. Durham," she said without looking up, "a clerical error runs one direction. Numbers that have been adjusted run a pattern." She turned the ledger to face him and put her finger on a figure in the third column. "This one's been changed. You can see where the original ink was scraped. Someone entered a new number over it." Walt leaned down to look. He could see it now that she pointed. A slight roughness in the paper, the ink sitting differently than it did in the lines above and below. "These are my books," he said slowly. "My own records." "I know." She turned the ledger back. "Who had access to them?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Pruitt's man came out here in February," he said. "Assessment visit. Standard," he said. "I showed him the books, left him with them about an hour while I checked the south fence." Meg nodded once. She made a small mark in the margin with her pen, a symbol that meant nothing to Walt, but meant she intended to come back to it. "I'll need the receipts from the barn," she said, "and any correspondence you have from the land office. Everything. Don't leave anything out because you think it's not important. In my experience, the things that look unimportant are exactly where the problem hides." Walt picked his hat up off the table and turned it in his hands once. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You just got here." She looked up at him. The lantern light caught the gray of her eyes and made them look, for just a moment, like something with depth in it, like water over stone. "Because you said your book stopped making sense 14 months ago," she said. "And now I understand why. And because someone in this county is counting on the fact that you don't." She closed the ledger. "That offends me, Mr. Durham. Professionally." He looked at her for a beat. Then he put his hat on and went to the door. "I'll start on the barn," he said. "I'll start on page 1, she said. The door closed behind him. His footsteps crossed the porch and descended into the yard. Meg pulled the lantern closer, opened the ledger again, and picked up her pen. Outside, the sun dropped toward the mesa and the shadows stretched long across the red ground. Somewhere in the distance a coyote started up, low and lonesome, working itself toward something it couldn't name. The mare shifted in the corral. The cottonwood moved in a wind that barely reached the porch. Inside the cabin, Margaret Calloway bent over a dead man's ledger and started looking for what had been taken. The barn smelled like old hay and iron, and the particular staleness of things stored without intention of retrieval. Walt worked his way through the stack of boxes in the back corner, with a lantern in one hand and the other pulling aside whatever was on top. A broken bridle, a canvas tarp, 3 tins of linseed oil gone hard. Eliza had been the one who knew where everything was. She had kept the barn the way she kept everything, with a system that made sense to her and that he had never fully learned because he had assumed he had time to learn it. He had not had time. The box he needed was at the bottom. Of course it was. He hauled the others out of the way, set the lantern on a nail above him, and opened the lid. Letters. Receipts. A deed copy, folded 3 times. A photograph face down that he turned over and then turned back. The receipts were rubber-banded together by year. That was Eliza's doing, not his. And he felt the familiar closing of his throat that came sometimes without warning. The one that had nothing to do with grief anymore, and everything to do with the specific, daily evidence that she had been more organized than him in ways he was still discovering. He found 1880. He found 1881. He found 1882. He unfolded each one and held it to the lantern. Then he carried them inside. Meg had not moved from the table. She had moved the lantern twice. He could see the scorch marks from the base on 2 different spots of the wood. And she had the second ledger open now. The first one closed and pushed to her left, with 3 slips of paper marking pages. She had a system. The marks were different colors: red ink, black ink, pencil. And whatever they meant something to her. She looked up when he came in and set the receipts on the table. She picked up 1880 first. Read it. Picked up 1881. Read it. Set that one beside the first, with careful alignment, the way a person sets down evidence when they want to look at 2 things at once. These are correct, she said. Good. That's not entirely good. She turned 1880 to face him and put her finger under the amount paid. Then she opened the first ledger to one of her marked pages and put her finger under a corresponding figure. The amount on your receipt doesn't match what's entered here. Walt looked. The receipt said $42.15. The ledger said $38.70. The difference is small enough that it wouldn't catch your eye if you weren't looking, Meg said. But it's consistent. Every tax payment entry in this ledger is lower than what you actually paid, which means on paper, there's always a balance outstanding. That's how he does it, Walt said. It wasn't a question. That's how someone does it, Meg said. I want to see Holt's records before I name anyone. Holt's records will be with Pruitt by now. She looked at him steadily. Then we need to see them before Pruitt finishes deciding what they say. Walt pulled out the chair across from her and sat. The chair was solid. He'd made it himself the first winter after they arrived, when the one they'd brought from back east finally gave out. He put his forearms on the table and looked at the ledger the way a man looks at a thing he doesn't want to be true. I should have looked at this sooner, he said. You were grieving. 14 months is a long time to grieve. Some people take longer. She said it without softness and without judgment, which was the kindest way to say it. What matters is we have the receipts. We have 2 years of receipts. I don't know what happened to 1879, or anything before. Meg was quiet. She turned back to the ledger and read in silence for a moment. Outside, the coyote had stopped, and the night had settled into the sound of wind against the cabin walls and the mare moving in the corral. Pruitt's been assessor how long? She asked. Since '78. Before that it was a man named Carver. He left. People said it was health, but I don't know. He paused. I didn't pay much attention to county politics when we first arrived. I was trying to build something. I kept my head down. People who keep their heads down are easier to pick, Meg said. I know that now. She closed the ledger and folded her hands on top of it. Her pen was tucked behind her ear. There was an ink mark on her jaw where she'd rested her hand without thinking. She didn't know it was there. Tell me about Robert Holt, she said. Walt leaned back. Good man. Came out the same year we did, '76. He had a dry goods store in town for a while, then gave it up and bought land east of here. He worked it hard. He wasn't rich, but he wasn't in trouble. Not last I knew. Did he keep his own books? I don't know. I don't think so. He wasn't. Numbers weren't his thing. He was a builder. Fences, structures. He had good hands. Walt stopped. He bid on 2 bulls in June. I told you that. You did. Meg's expression was careful. A man doesn't bid on breeding stock if he's expecting to die or expecting to lose his land. No, Walt said. He doesn't. The silence between them was a different kind now. Not the comfortable silence of 2 people who had run out of small talk. This was the silence of a thing that hadn't been said yet, taking up more and more space in the room. I need to get into the land office, Meg said. I need to see the original survey documents for your Eastern 40 and for Holt's holdings. If Pruitt's been altering entries across multiple properties, there'll be a pattern in the originals. Erasures, re-inking, dates that don't match the paper stock. The land office is county property, Walt said. Pruitt won't let you walk in and start going through his files. He will if I have a reason he has to honor. She pulled the tax notice toward her and read it again. And he watched her eyes move across the page with the focused attention of someone reading in a language that had taken years to learn. This notice was issued under the authority of the County Land and Tax Act of 1876. That act has a provision, Section 14, requiring the assessor to make all supporting documentation available to any property owner contesting a tax claim. She set the notice down. I know that provision because I used it in Cincinnati. The language is nearly identical. Walt looked at her. You're going to walk into Pruitt's office and cite Section 14 of a county act at him? Yes. And you think he'll comply? I think he'll try to find a reason he doesn't have to, Meg said. But I also think that if someone walks in there who clearly knows what Section 14 says, he'll want to know how much else she knows before he decides how to respond. She looked at Walt. Men like Pruitt operate on the assumption that the people they're taking from don't understand the mechanism. The moment that assumption is challenged, they get careful. And careful men make mistakes. Walt was quiet for a long moment. He turned the receipt for 1880 over in his hands, looking at the numbers without seeing them. You did this before, he said. In Cincinnati. You went after the man who took your husband's accounts. I tried. What happened? She was quiet for a beat. He had better lawyers than I had money to retain, and a judge who owed him something I never proved. She picked up her pen. But I learned the territory. That's not nothing. No, he said. It isn't. She went back to the ledger. He stayed at the table, which was not something he had planned to do. He had planned to go back outside, check the mare, and sleep on the porch the way he'd been sleeping since the walls started feeling wrong. But he stayed, and after a while he got up and filled the tin cups from the water bucket and set one beside her without being asked. And she took it without looking up and drank without setting her pen down. Around midnight she found it. She found it in the way a person finds something they were looking for without knowing the exact shape of it. Not with triumph, but with a kind of grim, focused stillness that was its own announcement. Come here, she said. He came around to her side of the table. She had both ledgers open, one beside the other, and she had the deed copy from the box, the one he'd unfolded and put aside. And she had the tax notice, and she had laid them out in a specific order with her marked pages aligned. Your deed records the Eastern 40 as parcel 14E in the county survey, she said. This ledger entry for the delinquent taxes references parcel 14F. Walt stared at it. That's a different parcel. Yes, it's also an unregistered parcel. It doesn't appear anywhere in your deed documentation because it doesn't exist. She kept her voice even, the way a person keeps a flame from guttering in wind, by giving it just enough air and no more. Pruitt isn't claiming you owe taxes on your land. He's claiming you owe taxes on a parcel that was never assigned to you, which means any back tax claim against it is legally unenforceable because you never held it, and the debt, therefore, does not attach to your property. Walt straightened. His hand came down flat on the table, not hard, just landed there, like something that had been hovering had finally settled. So he can't take the 40 acres, he said. Not on this basis. He'd know that if he looked at it carefully, which means either he hasn't looked carefully, she paused, or he knew you wouldn't, or he changed the parcel number after he filed the notice, Walt said. He said it slowly, the way a man says something he has known in his body for a while, before his mind catches up to it. He could do that. He has access to the original filings. Meg looked at him. That's why I need the originals. If the parcel number in the county record currently reads 14E, and I can show it was entered as 14F at the time of the notice, that's not a clerical error. That's falsification of a public document. That's a crime, Walt said. That's several crimes, Meg said. He walked to the door, not to open it, just to walk somewhere that wasn't the table, because the table was where the evidence was, and the evidence required stillness, and stillness was harder than it had been a minute ago. He turned around. How many other ranchers do you think? She met his eyes. I don't know, but the pattern in your books goes back to 1879. That's 4 years at minimum. She folded her hands on the ledger. Holt never had children. He had land, and he's dead, and Pruitt is the man handling his estate. The sound Walt made was quiet and sharp. The sound of something small and necessary breaking. He didn't die of fever, he said. I don't know that, Meg said carefully, but you're thinking it. I'm thinking that a man who bid on breeding stock in June was dead by August, and the person who profits most from his death is the man who is already altering his neighbor's tax records. She picked up her pen. I'm also thinking that suspicion is not evidence, and what I have right now is enough to stop your land from being taken, but not enough to do anything about Holt. Not yet, Walt said. Not yet, she agreed. He stood at the door a long time. The wind had picked up outside, and he could hear the cottonwood moving. A sound he knew so well he'd stopped hearing it years ago. The way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. I have to tell you something, he said. She waited. I worked for Pinkerton for 11 years. I was good at it. I was good at reading people and finding what they were hiding and building a case that held. He looked at his hands. Scarred, rope rough, the knuckle on his right index finger still not fully right from a job 8 years back. And then I was told to sign a statement that a man had been where he hadn't been. And I did it, because my superior told me to, and because the man we were protecting was a railroad contract worth a great deal to the agency. And because I told myself the thing I was saying could have been true, even if it wasn't. Meg had put her pen down. She was watching him. The man went to prison, Walt said. He had a wife, 2 children. He served 4 years before someone else's conscience got the better of them and the truth came out. He looked up. I left the agency the day I heard. Came out here. Bought this land. Thought if I built something honest with my own hands, it would, I don't know, even out. Does it? She asked. No, he said, but it's better than the alternative. She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked her pen back up. That's why you didn't report the ledger discrepancy, she said, when you first noticed it. He hadn't thought of it that way. He looked at her, and she was already looking back at the ledger, already moving forward. But she'd said it so simply that it sat in him like a key in a lock. I kept telling myself it could be a clerical error, he said. I know. She turned to Paige. You're not that man anymore, Mr. Durham. Whatever you told yourself in a room in 1871, you're not him. The man I watched today on that platform didn't keep his head down. He didn't answer. He didn't know how to answer that without it costing him something he wasn't sure he had to spend. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow we go to the land office. Pruitt will be there. I know. He's not going to like you coming in with a copy of the County Act and a ledger full of marked pages. No, Meg said. He isn't. She turned the lantern down 1 notch and pulled the ledger close. That's rather the point. Walt picked up his hat from where he'd left it on the chair, moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. Mrs. Calloway. She looked up. For what it's worth, he said. I'm glad you didn't get on that stage. She held his eyes for just a moment. There was something in hers, not warmth, not yet, but the door that had been open a crack all evening pushed a few inches wider. Go to sleep, Mr. Durham, she said. He went out. The door closed. She heard his footsteps cross the porch and descend and cross the yard, and then the quiet of a man settling where he slept, somewhere under the cottonwood where the ground was flat. She turned back to the ledger. There were more marks to make, and 10 days had become 9, and Edgar Pruitt was going to open his office door tomorrow morning, expecting an ordinary Tuesday. She intended to disappoint him. They left before the town was fully awake. The sky was still gray at the edges when Walt brought the wagon around, and Meg was already on the porch with her carpet bag and both ledgers wrapped in oilcloth under her arm. She had slept 3 hours. He could tell by the shadows under her eyes. But her posture gave nothing away, and she climbed up to the wagon seat with the same self-contained efficiency she had applied to everything since the depot yesterday. Neither of them spoke much on the ride in. The mare set her pace, and the wagon found the ruts and the prairie rolled past on both sides, frost still caught in the low spots where the sun hadn't reached. Walt had the receipts in his coat pocket, all 3 years, folded and stacked in order, because Meg had told him to bring them, and he was learning that when she told him to bring something, she had already thought 3 moves ahead about why. Cartereau came up slowly on the horizon, and then all at once, the way small towns did. By the time they turned onto the main street, a few people were out. The baker, a boy sweeping the mercantile steps, a woman carrying a basket toward the well. They looked at the wagon. GK kept his eyes on the road. The county land office was a narrow building between the post office and the barber shop, with a painted sign above the door that had faded to the point where Dorado County was legible, but Land and Tax Office required some goodwill. GK. A lamp was already lit. GK. The glass showed yellow through the front window. Walt set the brake. Meg was down before he finished wrapping the reins. "Let me do the talking," she said quietly, not looking at him. She was adjusting the oilcloth around the ledgers, tucking the edge firm. "I wasn't planning to talk." "Good." She went to the door and pushed it open. Edgar Pruitt was at his desk when they came in. He was a compact man in his mid-50s, with silver hair parted on the left and a suit that fit well enough to have been made for him, rather than bought ready-made. His hands, folded on the desk, were soft, the hands of a man who worked with paper and let other men do the rest. He looked up when the door opened with the expression of a man who was accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room he occupied. That expression lasted about 2 seconds. "Mr. Durham," he said. His voice was warm, practiced, the voice of a man who had learned that warmth cost nothing and bought a great deal. "I wasn't expecting you." His eyes moved to Meg with the particular assessment of a man cataloging a threat he hasn't named yet. "And you've brought—" "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met." "Margaret Calloway," Meg said. She set the oilcloth bundle on the edge of his desk and began unwrapping it with the unhurried precision of someone who had all the time she needed and wanted him to understand that. "I'm acting on behalf of Mr. Durham in the matter of the tax notice dated August the 4th. Pruitt's expression stayed warm. "I wasn't aware Mr. Durham had retained counsel." "He hasn't retained counsel. He's retained a bookkeeper." She had the ledgers out now. She set them on his desk without asking permission and opened the first one to her marked page. "I'd like to start with the parcel designation discrepancy, if you don't mind." Pruitt looked at the ledger. He looked at Meg. He looked at Walt, who was standing just inside the door with his hat in his hands and his face arranged in the neutral patience of a man who had learned to wait. "The notice references parcel 14F, Meg said. "Mr. Durham's deed records his eastern 40 acres as parcel 14E. I'd like to see the county survey documentation that establishes parcel 14F and assigns it to Mr. Durham." A pause. Short, controlled, but a pause. "That sounds like a clerical error," Pruitt said pleasantly. "Very common in county records. The numbers are easily transposed." "They are," Meg agreed. which is why I'd like to see the original survey document and confirm the correct designation. If it's a clerical error, it will take you 5 minutes to show me the original, and we can all go home." Pruitt unfolded his hands. He picked up a pen, turned it once. "I'm afraid the survey documents are archived. It could take several days to locate." Section 14 of the County Land and Tax Act of 1876 requires the assessor to make all supporting documentation available to a contesting property owner within 1 business day of a written request. Meg reached into her carpet bag and produced a folded sheet of paper. She set it on his desk. "That's Mr. Durham's written request, submitted now. It's Tuesday. You have until close of business Wednesday." Pruitt looked at the paper. He did not pick it up. His pen turned again in his fingers, once, twice, the small repetitive motion of a man whose composure was intact, but whose hands had gotten the small memo about it that his face hadn't received yet. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, and the warmth in his voice had shifted fractionally, the way a fire shifts when you close a flue. Still burning, but less air. "I appreciate your diligence on behalf of Mr. Durham, truly, but I want to assure you that this office operates with complete transparency. If there's been an error, we will of course correct it." "Wonderful," Meg said. "Then you won't have any difficulty providing the Holt estate documents as well." The pen stopped turning. "I beg your pardon?" "Robert Holt, deceased. His estate is currently under your administration." She looked at him steadily. Mr. Durham was Mr. Holt's neighbor and is a potential creditor to the estate. Mr. Holt owed him for a shared fence line repair in May. As a creditor, Mr. Durham has standing to review the estate inventory. She paused. "I can cite the relevant statute if that would be helpful." Pruitt set the pen down. He leaned back in his chair very slowly, the way a man leans back when he is reassessing the room he is in, and finding it somewhat different from the room he thought he'd entered. "You seem very familiar with county law, Mrs. Calloway, for a woman who arrived in Cartero yesterday." "The statutes are consistent across territories," Meg said. "I practiced in Hamilton County, Ohio, before coming west." "As a bookkeeper?" "As someone who read the law when the lawyers couldn't help me." She closed the first ledger and put her hand on it flat. "Mr. Pruitt, I'm going to be straightforward with you because I think it saves us both time. Mr. Durham received a tax notice with a parcel designation that does not correspond to any land he has ever held. The tax entries in his ledgers have been consistently under-recorded by amounts small enough to avoid casual detection, but large enough, over 4 years, to establish a fictitious outstanding balance. And the man who was most likely to face an identical situation died under circumstances that a neighbor of his describes as unexpected. She let that sit for exactly 1 beat. "I would like to resolve this quietly, by reviewing the original documents and correcting the record. That is what I would like to do." Pruitt was quiet. His face had not changed, which was itself a kind of change. The warmth had not cooled so much as been deliberately held in place, like a man gripping something he knows he's supposed to look relaxed about holding. "And if I decline to produce the documents voluntarily," he said, "then the written request I've submitted triggers the statutory timeline, and if you fail to comply, Mr. Durham files a complaint with the Territorial Governor's Office citing obstruction of a property rights claim." She picked up her carpet bag. "I understand the Territorial Governor has been interested in land administration irregularities in the southern counties. There was a piece in the Santa Fe paper about it in June." There hadn't been a piece in the Santa Fe paper. Or, if there had, she hadn't read it. But she had learned, in 8 months of fighting for Thomas's accounts in Cincinnati, that a man doing something wrong was always afraid of scrutiny he hadn't anticipated. And the specific fear of a newspaper piece, the the vagueness of it, the fact that you couldn't easily verify a negative, sat in a man differently than a concrete legal threat. Pruitt looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer, produced a ring of keys, and stood. "The archive room is through here," he said. "I'll see what I can locate." He took them through a door at the back of the main room, into a narrow space with shelves floor to ceiling, wooden boxes labeled by year and category, a small table in the center with a lamp. He found the survey file for 1876 without appearing to look for it, which meant he knew exactly where it was, which meant he had looked at it recently. He set it on the table. Then he said he needed to step out to find the Holt estate box, that it was likely in the secondary storage room, and he left them there. The moment the door closed, Walt said quietly, "He's not getting the Holt box." "No," Meg said. She was already opening the survey file. "He's deciding what to do. We have about 5 minutes before he comes back with a reason we can't see what we've already asked to see." She spread the survey map on the table and ran her finger along the parcel designations. "Here, 14E, your eastern 40, exactly as your deed states. No 14F anywhere in this quadrant." "So, it doesn't exist?" "It never existed." She found the tax records section of the file, flipped through it quickly, her eyes moving in the fast, practiced way of someone who had learned to read documents like other people read faces, for what was there and what had been removed. "The tax entry for your 1880 payment has been re-entered. You can see the original was erased. The paper's thinner there, rougher." She pressed lightly with her fingertip. Someone went back and re-entered a lower figure. Not different enough to be obvious, different enough to matter. Walt stood beside her, looking at the thin place in the paper. He didn't touch it. "How many others?" She was already checking. 1881, same. 1882, same. And then something else, another name in the adjacent column. She went still. "What?" Walt said. She pointed. In the record for 1880, in the column adjacent to Walt's entry, another ranch, another altered figure, the same technique, the same thinning of the paper where the original had been erased and re-entered. She checked 1881. Same property, same pattern. She didn't know the name, Aldridge E., but she wrote it on the back of her hand with her pen, because she had no paper in her pocket and no time to find any. Then she heard Pruitt's footsteps in the other room. She closed the survey file and straightened, and was standing with her hands folded when he came back through the door, carrying a box with Holt R. Estate written on the side. "Found it," he said pleasantly. He set it on the table beside the survey file and looked at them both with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is comfortable with it. "However, I'm afraid I can't allow review of the estate inventory without a formal creditor's claim filed with the court. That's standard procedure. I'm sure you understand. The claim form needs to be filed with the county clerk, and there's a 7-day processing period before access is granted." 7 days, which was 2 days after Walt's tax deadline. "Of course," Meg said. Her voice gave nothing. "We'll file the claim today." "The clerk's office closes at noon." Meg looked at Walt. Walt looked at the window. The sun was barely past the eastern rooftops. "Then we'd better go," Meg said. She picked up her ledgers and her carpet bag and thanked Pruitt for his time, and Pruitt held the door with all the courtesy of a man who had just won a round and was gracious about it. And they walked back through the main office and out into the street. The door closed behind them. Walt kept walking until they were past the barber shop, and then he stopped. His voice came out low and tight. "He's going to alter the Holt records before the 7 days are up." "Yes." "So the claim doesn't matter." "The claim matters for a different reason." She was already walking toward the county clerk's office at the end of the block. He fell into step beside her. "Pruitt thinks he has 7 days, and we have nothing. He's going to spend the next day or two moving things around in that box to protect himself, which means he's going to touch the documents. And the man touching documents leaves tracks. She pushed through the clerk's office door. What I need from the Holt file isn't the tax records. It's the surveyor's field notes from when Holt's land was originally platted. Those notes are kept separately from the main record. Pruitt may not realize I know that. Walt looked at her. Do you know who did the original survey? No. Do you? Man named Briggs. He retired to Socorro about 2 years back. He paused. He and Holt were friendly. Drank together at the saloon when Briggs was in town. Meg stopped at the clerk's counter. The clerk was a young man with ink-stained fingers and the look of someone perpetually GTK. She gave him her most straightforward expression. Not warm, not aggressive, simply the face of a person who had a task and was there to complete it. We need to file a creditor's claim against the Holt estate, she said, and I need GTK know who holds the original field notes from the survey of Holt's parcel. The notes from the surveyor, not the office copy. The clerk blinked. The original field GTA would be, those would stay with the surveyor, ma'am. The office only GTK the filed plat. Thank you, GTK said. They filed the claim. The clerk stamped it, dated it, gave them a copy. 7 days, he confirmed. Standard processing. Outside, Walt said, Briggs. Briggs, Meg agreed. How far is Socorro? Half a day's ride south. Can we get there and back by tomorrow night? He calculated. If we leave early, she nodded once, and he could see her adding it to whatever internal ledger she was keeping of time and movement and what needed to happen before 10 days became 9, became 8. She had the same quality he had recognized in the best investigators he'd worked with in his Pinkerton years. Not impatience, but velocity. The sense that she was always 2 moves ahead, and the moves were not guesses. They were walking back toward the wagon when a voice called from across the street. Mr. Durham! Walt turned. A woman was crossing toward them, gray-haired, moving with the brisk purpose of someone who did not waste steps. Dorothy Yancey, who ran the mercantile on the south end of Main Street. He had bought supplies from her twice a year for 6 years without exchanging more than transaction-necessary words. She had the reputation of knowing everything that happened in Cartero, without having cultivated that reputation herself, which meant it was simply true. I heard you were in with Pruitt, she said, not lowering her voice. She stopped in front of them and looked at Meg with the direct appraisal of a woman who had been evaluating people across a counter for 40 years. You're the woman from the depot. Margaret Calloway, Meg said. Dorothy Yancey. She didn't offer her hand, but her eyes were not unkind. I knew Robert Holt, 14 years. He came in every Thursday for tobacco and coffee, and he talked too much about his plans for that land. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. He wasn't sick, not in June, not in July. I saw him July 20th. He was in my store for an hour. He ate half a jar of crackers and complained about the price of wire. She paused. He was dead 11 days later. The street was not empty. 2 men were visible in front of the saloon. The baker was still in her doorway. Walt felt the particular awareness he had learned in the field, the sense of being observed from multiple directions by people who were doing it carefully. Mrs. Yancey, Meg said, would you be willing to say what you just told us in a formal statement? In writing, signed, dated? Dorothy Yancey looked at her for a long moment. Her hands were clasped in front of her apron, the posture of a woman accustomed to standing and thinking at the same time. I've been waiting, she said, for someone to ask me that question for 3 weeks. She turned and went back toward her store without another word. They followed her inside, into the smell of flour and leather and dried herbs hanging in bundles from the rafters. And Dorothy went behind her counter and pulled out a sheet of paper and a pen, and held the pen out to Meg. You write it, Dorothy said. You'll write it right. Meg took the pen. She stood at the counter and wrote what Dorothy dictated in her clean, educated hand. And Dorothy corrected one word and approved the rest, and signed a long time ago. Walt watched them and felt something shift in his chest that he recognized only distantly from years back, from the time before Eliza died, and before he signed a false statement, and before he had stopped trusting himself to know which direction was right when it mattered. He recognized it as the particular feeling of being on the correct side of something, and the discomfort of having forgotten what it felt like. Meg folded the statement and put it in her carpet bag beside the ledgers. "Thank you, Mrs. Yancey," she said. "Don't thank me," Dorothy said. She was already straightening her counter, putting the pen away, resuming the ordinary business of her day with the efficiency of a woman who had done what needed doing and moved on. "Find out what happened to Robert. That'll be thanks enough." They walked back to the wagon in the thin morning light. Walt unhitched the mare and climbed up and unwrapped the reins, and Meg was already beside him on the seat with the carpet bag in her lap, her hands still. "Pruitt's watching us," she said very quietly, looking straight ahead. Walt didn't turn. "I know. The man at the end of the block. He's been there since we came out of the land office. His name's Coe. He does odd jobs for Pruitt. I've seen him twice in the past month, out near my east fence line, and I told myself he was just passing through." He picked up the reins. "I should have paid more attention." "You're paying attention now," she said. He clicked his tongue, and the mare moved, and the wagon turned south toward the ranch road. Behind them, the man called Coe remained on the corner without moving, watching them go. Meg said nothing for the first mile. Then she opened her carpet bag, took out the folded statement, and read it again, though she had written every word herself and did not need to read it. Walt understood the gesture. It was what she did instead of whatever other people did when they were frightened and would not show it. "If Pruitt had Holt killed," she said, "he's not going to let two people walk into a retired surveyor's house in Socorro and walk back out." "No," Walt said, "he isn't." She folded the statement and put it back. "Do you still have your Pinkerton service revolver?" He had not expected that question. He looked at her. Her profile was straight against the open sky, chin level, eyes on the road ahead. "Under the floorboard in the cabin," he said. She nodded once, as if this confirmed something she had already accounted for. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was not the easy silence of the night before. This one had weight in it. The weight of what they both now understood was larger and more dangerous than a falsified tax notice. Walt kept his eyes on the road and his hands steady on the reins, and did not let himself think about what it meant yet, that she had asked about the revolver, without flinching and without explaining why. He thought about it anyway. They left for Socorro before dawn. Walt had the revolver cleaned and loaded and back under the floorboard by the time Meg came down from the loft, and he did not tell her he'd done it that way, put it back rather than on his person, because he wanted her to know it was there, without either of them having to acknowledge what that meant about the day ahead. She came down with her carpet bag already packed, the ledgers inside, Dorothy Yancey's statement folded between them. She had changed into her gray dress. She had pinned her hair back with a particular efficiency of someone pinning it to stay, not to look a certain way. She looked at him across the cabin. He was at the stove, with coffee he'd made an hour earlier, the 2 tin cups already poured. "You slept," he said. "Some." She took the cup. "You didn't." "I'm fine." She didn't argue it. She drank her coffee standing, looking at the dark window the way a person looks at a thing they're about to walk into. He watched her and thought about what she'd said the night before, after they got back and he'd brought the revolver up from the floorboard and sat at the table with it disassembled in front of him. She'd come down from the loft and seen him and not said anything for a long moment. And then she'd said, "I know how to use one, if it comes to that." He'd looked at her. "My husband's," she said. "I practiced after he died." The neighborhood changed. She'd gone back up the ladder without another word, and he'd sat there, reassembling the revolver in the lamplight, and thought about all the ways a woman learned to protect herself in the space left by a man who was no longer there to do it. They were on the road to Socorro, while the stars were still out. The ride took most of the morning. Walt knew the road well enough to let the mare find her pace, and they talked when there was something to say, and were quiet when there wasn't. And it was the good kind of quiet now, the kind that had been established between them over the past 2 days, like a foundation being laid without ceremony. At one point, Meg took out the second ledger and read it in her lap while the wagon moved, and he let her, and when she made a small sound, not quite a word, just the sound of a mind arriving somewhere it had been heading, he waited. "Aldridge," she said. "The name from the survey record." "I know an Aldridge. Edwin Aldridge, cattle rancher east of the Holt property. His tax records show the same pattern as yours. Systematic under-entry going back to 1879. By my calculation, he has a fictitious outstanding balance of just under $200. She closed the ledger. "Has he received a notice?" "Not that I know of, but I haven't spoken to Edwin Aldridge in 8 months. He paused. "He'd have no reason to tell me." "He needs to know," Meg said, "before Pruitt decides the timing is right." "After Socorro." "After Socorro," she agreed. They found Briggs in a small house on the south edge of town, a low adobe with a garden that had been kept up more carefully than the house itself. He was in the garden when they came up the road, a man of 70 or so, with the dried-out look of someone who had spent 40 years in the sun and made peace with what it had done to him. He had a trowel in one hand, and he straightened slowly when the wagon pulled up, and he looked at GK with the neutral recognition of a man placing a face he'd seen before, but GK couldn't immediately name. "Durham," Walt said. "Walt Durham. I run the Copper Creek Ranch, northwest of Cartero." Briggs nodded, slow. "I remember. You bought the Kendrick parcel in '76. His eyes moved to Meg. "This is Margaret Calloway," Walt said. "She's helping me with a property matter." Briggs looked at her for a moment, and whatever he saw seemed to satisfy some internal assessment, because he nodded again and said, "Come inside, then," and led them in without ceremony. The house was cool and dark, an ordered GK of a man who lived alone and had decided on a system and kept to it. A drafting table took up most of one wall, still covered with equipment Briggs clearly had not put away when he retired, but simply stopped using. Survey instruments, rolled maps in tubes, a set of compass cases, the tools of a life's work, present and unused, which was its own kind of story. Briggs put water on and turned to face them. "What's the property matter?" Walt looked at Meg. She had taken the ledger out. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "you surveyed Robert Holt's parcel in 1876. I'd like to ask you about the field notes from that survey." Something moved in the old man's face. Subtle, like wind on still water, gone almost before it registered. "Robert died," he said. "Yes," Meg said. "We're looking into the circumstances." Circumstances. Briggs pulled a chair out from the table and sat. He did not offer them chairs, not from rudeness, but from the distraction of a man suddenly somewhere else in his thoughts. "What do you want to know about the field notes?" "I want to know if you still have them," Meg said. "The original field notes, not the copy filed with the county office." "I have them." He said it without hesitation, which told her he'd thought about those notes recently. "I keep all my originals, filed by year and parcel." He looked at her steadily. "Why does it matter what the originals say? The filed plat is the legal record." "The filed plat can be altered," Meg said. The originals in your possession cannot. If the parcel designations in the county record have been changed after filing, your originals would show the correct designations at the time of survey. Briggs was quiet. He looked at his hands, the trowel still in one, the dirt under his nails from the garden. "Pruitt," he said. It wasn't the question. "We believe so," Meg said. "How many properties?" "We can confirm 3. There may be more." Briggs set the trowel down on the table very carefully, the way a man sets down something when his hands have started to be unsteady, and he doesn't want anyone to notice. "Robert came to see me," he said, 6 weeks before he died. He'd gotten a letter from the county office. I don't know if it was a formal notice or just a letter, saying there was a question about his eastern boundary, that it might have been surveyed wrong. He wanted to know if I'd made an error. "Had you?" Meg asked. "No." His voice was flat and certain. "I surveyed that parcel myself. I walked every line. Robert's eastern boundary is exactly where it says it is on the original plat. There was no error." He looked at Meg. "I told him that. I told him the original notes were here if he needed them." "Did he come back for them?" "No." A pause. "He died 3 weeks later." The water had come to a boil. Nobody moved to address it. "Mr. Briggs," Meg said, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly." "Go ahead." "Do you believe Robert Holt died of fever?" The old man looked at her for a long time. The boiling water made it sound in the corner. Outside, somewhere, a dog was barking at something that didn't stop. "I believe Robert Holt was a healthy man in June," Briggs said finally, "and I believe he died in August. And I believe he came to me 6 weeks before that, asking about a boundary dispute he didn't understand and was frightened by." He paused. "I've been a surveyor for 40 years. I know land. I know how people hold it and what they do to keep it, and what other people do to take it. And I know that a man who bids on 2 bulls in June doesn't die of fever in August unless something else is happening." He stood. "The notes are in the back room. I'll get them." He was gone perhaps 5 minutes. Walt had poured the water himself, set 3 cups on the table because something needed to be done with his hands while they waited, and standing still in that room with all those unused instruments and all that weight in the air was harder than it should have been. Meg was reading her ledger again. She did that when she needed to keep her mind from getting ahead of itself, gave it something specific to do. He had noticed that about her, the way she used the numbers as an anchor. He understood it. He had used a great many things over the years as anchors. Most of them had eventually come loose. Briggs came back with a flat wooden case, the kind made to carry drawings without bending them. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside, filed in order, hand-labeled in small, precise handwriting, the field notes for every survey he'd completed in Dorado County between 1875 and 1881. He found the Holt parcel without looking. He'd known where it was before he went to get it. He set the notes on the table and spread them flat. Meg leaned over them. Her finger moved along the parcel designation at the top of the first page, and then she opened the second ledger and put it beside the notes and compared the figures. And her finger stopped. "The parcel designation in the county record reads 22-C, she said. "Your original notes show 22-A. 22-A is what I filed," Briggs said. "I wrote it myself." 22C is a parcel that abuts the county road, Meg said. Her voice was controlled. If Holt's land was reclassified as 22C, it would be subject to the county road easement provision, which gives the county right of acquisition for road expansion at assessed value rather than market value. She looked up at Briggs. What is Holt's land worth at market? $2,300, Briggs said. Good water access, south-facing grade. At assessed value under the easement provision? 400, maybe less, depending on how they ran the assessment. Walt set his cup down. Pruitt would buy it at 400 through the estate, sell it at market value, and pocket the difference. With Holt dead and no heirs, Meg said, there's no one to contest the assessed price. She straightened. Mr. Briggs, I need to take these notes with me. Briggs didn't hesitate. Take them. I'll give you a signed receipt. I don't need a receipt. I need someone to use them. He looked at her with the steady seriousness of a man who had been carrying something by himself and was ready to put it down. I should have done something when Robert came to see me. I should have ridden into Cartereau and gone to the sheriff. He stopped. But the sheriff in this county has been Pruitt's man for 3 years. Everyone knows it. Nobody says it. Who would you say it to? Walt asked. If you were going to say it. Briggs thought about it. The Territorial Land Commissioner. He's out of Santa Fe, not connected to county politics. He paused. But you'd need documentation. The commissioner doesn't act on testimony alone. He needs paper. We have paper, Meg said. She began to gather the field notes carefully, rolling them the way Briggs had kept them, without bending. We have the original ledger entries showing the alterations. We have your field notes showing the parcel reclassification. We have a signed witness statement about the timing of Holt's death. And we have the county's own tax notice showing a parcel designation that doesn't exist in the official survey record. She slid the notes into the flat case. That's a documented pattern of falsification across multiple properties. It's enough for the commissioner to open an investigation. And an open investigation makes it significantly more difficult for Pruitt to move against any additional properties while it's ongoing. Briggs looked at her. You've done this before. I've tried to do this before, she said. I know the difference. They rode back with the field notes in the case, wrapped in oilcloth and tied under the wagon seat. The sun was past center and heading west, and the afternoon light came flat and gold across the red ground and made everything look more settled than it was. They were 4 miles from Cartereau when Walt saw the rider. He was on a rise to the east, sitting still, watching the road. The distance made detail impossible, but the stillness was specific. The stillness of a man waiting for something, not passing through. Walt had been reading stillness for long enough to know the difference. Don't look east, he said quietly. Meg didn't look. The man from this morning. Maybe. He kept his eyes on the road and the mare's pace even. We're going to go through town without stopping, straight through. We need to get to Aldridge. Not today. His voice came out with a firmness that surprised him slightly. Not aggression, decision. The particular quality of someone who had stopped arguing with himself about what the situation required. Today we get back to the ranch, and we write the complaint to the Territorial Commissioner, and we get it on the morning stage to Santa Fe. Everything else is secondary until that document is out of our hands and in someone else's. Meg was quiet for a moment. He could feel her weighing it. All right, she said. They went through Cartereau at a steady pace. The mercantile, the post office, the land office with its faded sign. Pruitt's window caught the afternoon light. Walt didn't look at it directly. He looked at the road, at the space 10 feet ahead of the wagon, the same way he had learned to manage field situations. Never the periphery, always the immediate center. The periphery took care of itself, or it didn't. Attention split in too many directions, went soft everywhere. Dorothy Yancey was in the doorway of her store as they passed. She looked at them. Her eyes went to the oilcloth bundle under the seat, and then back to Meg's face, and she gave the smallest nod. The nod of a woman who understood what was being carried and was glad it was moving. Meg saw it. She didn't nod back. She kept her face forward. They were through town and on the ranch road before Walt let himself adjust his grip on the reins. His hands had been tighter than he'd realized. He opened and closed them once against the leather. "The man on the ridge," Meg said. "He didn't follow us through town." "No." "But he knows we went to Socorro." "He knows we went south. He doesn't know who we saw." He paused. "Pruitt will guess, eventually. Briggs is the only surviving surveyor from that period. But guessing isn't knowing, and knowing isn't being able to stop us if the complaint is already on its way to Santa Fe." Meg had the case in her lap now, the oilcloth folded back so she could see the edge of the wooden box. She wasn't touching it, just keeping her eyes on it, the way you kept your eyes on a thing that had taken considerable effort to obtain. "How long does it take the stage to reach Santa Fe from Cartero?" she asked. 2 days, assuming weather. "And the commissioner's office, how quickly do they respond to a documented complaint?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't know how fast this works, when it works." In Hamilton County, it took 11 days from filing to a preliminary investigator being assigned. She paused. 11 days, during which the man we'd filed against had time to move assets, alter records, and get a letter to a judge I didn't know he knew. She folded the oilcloth back over the case. "I'm not making that mistake again. The complaint needs to name Pruitt explicitly, cite each documented falsification by date and parcel, and include copies of all the supporting evidence. Not originals, copies. The originals stay with us." "The originals stay with us," she confirmed, "hidden, separately from each other." He looked at her. "You've thought about this already. When did you think about this?" "Last night," she said, "after you came in from the barn." "You should have slept." "I sleep better when I've thought things through." She looked straight ahead at the road. "My husband used to say I worried too much, that I mapped out disasters that hadn't happened and probably wouldn't." Her voice was steady. "He was a good man. He trusted people and kept poor records and died before he could learn how expensive both of those things were." She was quiet for a beat. "I am not going to let that happen to you." Walt didn't know what to do with that. It sat in him with more weight than most of what had been said in the past 2 days, which had been a great deal. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. "You can call me Meg," she said. "We've been through enough for that." He kept his eyes on the road. Something in his chest did a thing he hadn't been prepared for. Not large, not dramatic, just a shift. The way a load shifts when you redistribute the weight. Easier to carry is all. Still heavy, but easier. "Meg," he said. "Yes, when this is over," he said, and then he stopped because he didn't know exactly how to finish it. And he had learned enough about himself to know that when he didn't know how to finish a thing, it was better to find the right words than to use the available ones. She waited. She had that quality. She never rushed a silence. "I'd like you to stay," he said. "Not just because of the books. I mean, I want the books, and I want the help with the land business. All of it. But that's not the only reason I'd want you to stay." The wagon moved. The mare's hooves kept their steady beat on the packed dirt. "Ask me again," Meg said, "when this is over." "I will," he said. "I know," she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite warmth, and not quite the door pushed open from before, but something further along. A light in the window of a place that had been dark a long time. They reached the ranch as the sun touched the mesa. Walt unhitched the mare and saw to her, while Meg went inside and cleared the table and set out everything. The ledgers, the field notes unrolled and weighted at the corners, Dorothy Yancey's signed statement, the tax notice, the deed copy, the receipts, all of it spread in the deliberate order of a person building an argument piece by piece. Each document a sentence in a case that needed to be airtight. He came in and washed his hands and sat down across from her. "Tell me what you need," he said. "I need you to write what you know," she said, "in your own words. What you observed about the alterations in the ledger. What Pruitt's man did during the assessment visit in February. What you know about the other ranchers." She put paper and a pen in front of him. "I'll write the formal complaint. Your statement goes with it as a sworn affidavit." He picked up the pen, put it down. "I'm not a good writer." "You don't need to be good. You need to be accurate." She looked at him across all that paper. "Write what happened, what you saw, what you know to be true." He picked up the pen again. He thought about accuracy. He thought about 11 years as a Pinkerton investigator. About what it meant to be accurate when accurate was hard, when it cost something. He thought about a statement he had signed in 1871 that was not accurate, and how it had sat in him every day since. He started to write. They worked through the evening. The lamp burned low, and he refilled it once. Outside the wind came up, cold now. The particular cold that arrived in New Mexico territory in late September with no apology. The coyote started somewhere to the west. The mare shifted in the corral. All the sounds of the ordinary night, covering what was happening inside. Two people at a table, building the thing that would either bring down Edgar Pruitt or give him sufficient warning to come at them before it did. Meg read his statement twice, suggested 4 changes in word choice for legal clarity, and incorporated them into the formal complaint in the margin without asking. Just read them back to him so he could confirm, because it was his statement and she understood the difference between helping and overwriting. He confirmed each one. She wrote them in. By midnight, the complaint was done. 3 pages in her clear, precise hand, citing each falsification by date and parcel number, and cross-referencing the supporting documents, naming Pruitt as the responsible party in language that was damning without being inflammatory, the kind of language that made officials take a thing seriously without feeling like they were being pushed into it. She set her pen down. He looked at the document, at everything laid out on the table. 3 days ago, he had driven to Cartereau for fence wire and an axle pin, and had come home with a woman who had torn a letter in half and refused a stage ticket, and was now sitting across from him, having just completed the most coherent and damaging legal document he had seen since his Pinkerton days. "It's good," he said. "It's enough," she said. "Whether it's good depends on what the commissioner does with it." She began organizing the copies from the originals, her hands moving with the automatic economy of deep fatigue that had been refused permission to show itself all day. "The originals go in the floor of the barn, under the loose board by the east stall. The copies go on the stage." "I'll take them to the stage office first thing," he said. "We'll take them," she said, and looked up at him, and he understood that she was not going to let these documents out of her sight until they were in the stage driver's locked box, because she had trusted a process once before, and the process had been compromised before it finished, and she was not mapping a disaster that hadn't happened. She was recognizing one that had. "All right," he said. "We'll take them." She nodded. She started to stand and stopped. Her hand went flat on the table, and she looked at it, and he realized she was shaking. Finally, barely perceptible, the shaking of someone who had been holding tension in their body all day and had just, in the space of one motion, let part of it down. He didn't say anything. He got up and poured the last of the coffee and set it in front of her and sat back down. She looked at the cup. Then she picked it up with both hands and held it. "Thank you," she said. It was not about the coffee. You did the work, he said. You handed me the receipts. She looked at him over the cup. A man who handed over what he had and trusted someone else to know what to do with it. That's not nothing, Walt. That's harder than most people think. He looked at his hands, the pen marks on his finger from 3 hours of writing. Scarred hands. Hands that had done a great deal, and not all of it right. I'm going to make this right, he said. And he meant Pruitt. And he meant the land. And he meant something older than both of those things. Something he had been carrying since 1871. And she was looking at him like she understood every layer of it, without needing him to name them separately. I know you are, she said. He went to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. The night was cold and clear, and the stars were out in the quantity that always made him feel both very small and very certain that something larger than his own mistakes was operating in the world. Get some sleep, he said. Some, she said. He went out to the porch, spread his blanket, lay down. The boards were hard under his shoulders. The light from the cabin window spilled yellow onto the yard. Inside, he could hear her moving, the quiet sounds of the last things being put in order. Documents stacked, lamp turned down, the particular silence of a person who had done what they came to do and was finally, briefly, still. Then the light went out. Walt lay in the dark and looked at the stars and thought about the morning, about the stage office, about Edgar Pruitt opening his door on a Wednesday and not yet knowing what was already in motion. He thought about Eliza and about the man in Cincinnati who had served 4 years for something Walt had helped make possible. And he thought about a woman who had arrived in Cartero with 43 cents and a trunk full of documents and had spent 3 days dismantling a scheme that had been running for 4 years. He thought about what he'd said in the wagon and what she'd said back. And he thought that some things were worth being careful with, worth getting right, worth waiting to say again properly when the ground was steadier. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 14 months, he was not dreading the morning. The stage office opened at 7. They were there at 6:45. Walt tied the mare to the post outside, and Meg went in first with a carpetbag held against her side. The copies of the complaint and all supporting documents sealed inside an envelope she had addressed the night before in her clearest hand to the office of the Territorial Land Commissioner, Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory. The stage driver was a man named Hector Voss, who had been running the Cartero line for 11 years, and who looked at the two of them with the incurious efficiency of a man who had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Certified document, Meg said. Needs a signature on delivery. Costs extra, Voss said. I know. She put the money on the counter without being told the amount. She had counted it out the night before. Voss stamped the envelope, wrote the delivery confirmation number in his ledger, handed her the receipt stub. She read it, folded it, put it in her inside pocket. Not the carpetbag, her inside pocket, close to her body, where she would feel it if someone tried to take it. 2 days to Santa Fe, Voss said. Weather holding? Thank you, Meg said. They walked out. The street was still quiet. The land office at the other end of the block was dark. Pruitt didn't open until 8. Walt untied the mare, and they stood for a moment beside the wagon, not getting in yet, both of them looking at nothing in particular, while the full weight of what had just happened settled. It's done, Walt said. That part is, Meg said. He looked at her. She was watching the land office window, the way you watch a thing you've been watching for several days, without letting yourself be seen doing it. He's going to know, she said. When the commissioner's investigator shows up, Pruitt will know it came from us. There's no one else it could have come from. I know. That changes things. For the ranch, for you. She looked at him. I want you to know I understand that, what this might cost. It was already costing, he said, just slower. She nodded once. He helped her up to the wagon seat. She let him, this time, and he didn't remark on it. And they drove back through town the way they'd come, past the Mercantile, where Dorothy Yancey was taking in her sign from the night before, past the depot, where this had all started 4 days ago. Meg looked at the depot as they passed it, but said nothing. And Walt thought about a woman sitting on a trunk with her spine straight and her knuckles white and her face giving nothing away. And then he looked at the same woman on the seat beside him and understood that those were not two different women. They went to see Edwin Aldridge. His ranch was 6 miles east, past the dry creek bed and through the Pinyon. A modest operation with a good barn and a house that showed the work of a man who took care of things without making a show of it. Aldridge himself was in the corral when they pulled up, working with a young horse that had something wrong with its left foreleg, going slowly, talking to it. He was a broad man in his 60s, with a gray beard and the permanently squinting expression of someone who had spent too many years reading the sky for weather. He looked up when the wagon came into the yard. He knew Walt. He looked at Meg with polite uncertainty. "Edwin," Walt said, "got something you need to hear." Aldridge let himself out of the corral and listened. He stood with his arms crossed and his hat in his hands while Meg laid it out. The pattern in the tax records, the parcel designation discrepancy, the complaint filed that morning, what it meant, and what was likely to happen next. She spoke plainly, without softening it or stretching it, because Edwin Aldridge did not look like a man who wanted things softened or stretched. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I got a letter 2 weeks ago, from the county office. Said there was a question about my southwest boundary. Said they'd need to resurvey." Meg and Walt looked at each other. "Did you respond?" Meg asked. "Not yet. I was thinking on it." His jaw worked. "Robert died." "I know," Meg said. "We weren't close, but we were neighbors 20 years. He put his hat back on. "A man doesn't bid on bulls in June and die of fever in August." "No," Meg said. "He doesn't." Aldridge looked at Walt. "You trust this woman?" "More than I've trusted most people in 11 years, Walt said. Aldridge looked back at Meg. Something decided in his face. "What do you need from me?" "Don't respond to the letter," she said. "Don't go to the county office under any pretext Pruitt invents. And if anyone comes to this ranch asking to see your deed or your tax records, you send them away and you wire me at the Cartero Telegraph Office." She paused. "In the meantime, find every receipt you have for every tax payment you've made since 1879 and put them somewhere only you know about." "Behind the hearthstone," Aldridge said immediately, like a man who had already been thinking about exactly that kind of hiding. "That'll do," she said. They left him with a copy of the tax receipt comparison she'd made from the ledger. His figures against what he'd actually paid, the discrepancy laid out clearly, and drove back toward the ranch. They were halfway home when they saw Co. He was on the road, not at a distance this time, not on a ridge watching. He was on the road, pulled across it on a horse, sitting sideways in the saddle, with the studied casualness of a man who wanted to appear to have stopped by coincidence. Walt slowed the mare. He didn't stop. Co let them come close enough that stopping was the natural thing to do. And then he smiled, the smile of a man who had practiced being pleasant without getting good at it. "Morning, Durham. Didn't know you had company staying out at the Copper Creek." "She's my bookkeeper," Walt said. His voice was flat and even, the voice he'd developed over 11 years of talking to men who were testing him. "Is there something you need, Co?" "Mr. Pruitt asked me to pass along a message." Co's eyes went to Meg, assessed her, went back to Walt. "He says he located the survey documentation you asked about. He'd like to meet with you this afternoon to go over it together. Clear up any misunderstandings." The documentation that Meg had already proven was falsified. The meeting that would happen after the complaint was already in the stage driver's locked box and halfway to the first way station. Meg said nothing. She sat with her hands in her lap and her face arranged in the way she arranged it when she was absorbing information and producing no information in return. "Tell Mr. Pruitt I appreciate the offer," Walt said. "I'll stop by when I'm in town next." "He was hoping today," Co said. "I'm busy today." Walt clicked his tongue, and the mare started forward. Co didn't move his horse immediately, making them go around him, which was a thing designed to communicate something. Walt let the mare navigate it without acknowledging the communication. They were a quarter-mile past him when Meg said quietly, "He's going to tell Pruitt about the Aldridge visit." "I know." "Pruitt's going to know we've been warning the other ranchers." "Yes, which means he'll know the net is wider than just your complaint." She turned slightly on the seat. "He's going to move fast, either to discredit us before the commissioner acts or to—" She stopped. "Or to make sure we can't testify," Walt said. She had thought that word before he said it. He could tell by the fact that she didn't react to it. She had already been living with it and had decided not to say it first and let him say it, because she understood that some things a man needed to name for himself before they were real enough to act on. "How long before the commissioner can have an investigator in Cartero?" she asked. "If they act on it immediately, 10 days, 2 weeks?" "That's a long time." "Yes," he said, "it is." They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the ranch, Walt put the mare in the corral and came inside, and went directly to the floorboard near the stove, the one he'd put back without a word after cleaning the revolver 2 nights ago. He pulled it up. The revolver was there. He checked the cylinder. Loaded. He put it on the table. Meg looked at it. Then she sat down, opened her carpet bag, and produced a small pistol. Short-barreled, old, the grip wrapped in cord where the original wood had cracked. She set it beside his revolver on the table. He looked at it, looked at her. "My husband's," she said. "I told you." "You did." They sat at the table with the 2 guns between them, and Walt thought that this was not a conversation he had imagined having 4 days ago when he drove to Cartero for fence wire. And he thought that a great many things he had not imagined 4 days ago were now simply true, and there was no productive path through that observation except to deal with what was in front of him. "If Pruitt sends Co out here," Walt said, "it won't be to talk." "I know." "You could go to Dorothy Yancey's, stay in town until—" "No." She said it without heat, without argument. Just the flat certainty of a woman who had finished being somewhere she didn't choose. "I'm not leaving." "Meg." "Walt." She looked at him directly, the gray eyes level, the way they'd been level on the depot platform when she'd assessed him through the crowd. "I didn't come this far to let a frightened man with a county stamp and someone else's gun make me go somewhere safe while the work I did is still sitting unfinished. I am not doing that." A pause. "I am also not incapable of defending myself. We've established that." He looked at the small pistol on the table. "Fair enough," he said. They spent the rest of the morning preparing in the quiet, practical way of people who had agreed on what the situation was and had moved past the part where you argued about it. Walt checked the fence line on the north pasture where the approach to the ranch was clearest and could be seen from the cabin window. Meg copied the key figures from both ledgers into a third document, a simplified version, easier to read, designed for a person who was not trained to read a full accounting record, and sealed it in an envelope addressed to Dorothy Yancey with a note on the outside that said only, If you don't hear from us by Friday, give this to the territorial marshal." Walt wrote it into town himself and left it with Dorothy, who took it with the expression of a woman who had been expecting something like this and had her thoughts in order about it. On the way back, he stopped at the ridge above the dry creek. From there, he could see the ranch, the road from town, the road from Aldridge's place, and the open ground to the south, where the only natural approach cover was a dry wash about 300 yards out. He sat on the mare and looked at it the way he had looked at approach problems for 11 years, and thought about where a man would come from if he wanted to come without being seen, and where he would position himself if he was the one waiting. He went back to the ranch. He told Meg what he'd seen and what he thought. She listened. Then she moved her pallet in the loft to the east wall, where the small window gave a sight line to the road, and she put her pistol on the floor beside it, where her hand could find it without needing light. He did not argue with this. He slept inside for the first time since Eliza died, on the floor near the door with his back to the wall, and the revolver beside him, and one ear on the night. Nothing came that night, or the next. On the third morning, a rider came from town, and Walt was at the fence before the rider reached the yard. And the rider was not Co. It was the telegraph boy, 14 years old, breathless, holding an envelope. Walt took it, read it, walked to the cabin. Meg was at the table with the ledgers. She looked up. He set the telegram in front of her. It read, "Complaint received. Investigator dispatched Cartero. Arrive Thursday. Commissioner Hayes. Do not approach subject. Do not destroy documents." She read it twice. Her hands were still. "Thursday," she said. "2 days," he said. She set the telegram down on the table and looked at it, and did not say anything for a long moment. And Walt understood that she was letting herself feel something she had not let herself feel while there was still work to do. The way you only notice how cold you are once you're inside and the door is shut. "It worked," she said. "You worked," he said. She shook her head. "Your receipts? Briggs's field notes? Dorothy's statement? Your affidavit?" She looked up at him. "I just knew how to put them in order." He sat down across from her. The table was covered in paper. The same table where 4 days ago there had been 2 ledger books and a tax notice, and a lamp that he'd been using in the wrong spot. He thought about how a table could hold the same objects over the same wood grain and mean completely different things depending on who was sitting at it. "I need to ask you something," he said. She waited. "What do you want?" He said it plainly, the way she had taught him by example to say things. "Not what you came west for. Not what the situation required. What do you actually want? Now. Going forward." She looked at him for a long time. Outside, the mare moved in the corral. A meadowlark called once from the grass and went quiet. "I want to finish what I started," she said. "With the books. With the complaint. I want to see Pruitt face someone who outranks him and can't be bought. And I want to make sure Aldridge and every other rancher he's been stealing from gets their records corrected." She paused. "That's what I came here to do. I know that now." "And after?" he said. She held his eyes. "Ask me the other thing." He leaned forward, both arms on the table. "I asked you in the wagon to stay," he said. "I'm asking you again. Not because I need a bookkeeper, though I do. Not because the ranch is struggling without someone who can read numbers, though it is." He stopped. "I'm asking because 4 days ago I had been going through the motions of being alive for 14 months, and I had made my peace with that being enough. And then you tore a letter in half in a train depot, and it turned out it wasn't enough. It hadn't been enough for a long time. I just needed someone to show me what enough actually looked like. Her hands were flat on the table. She looked at them. The ink stain on the right thumb, the roughened knuckles, the cord-thin tendons of a woman who had worked with her hands for longer than anyone expected her to. Then she looked at his hands. Scarred, rope rough, the pen marks still showing from 3 nights ago. "I didn't come west looking for this," she said. "I know. I came looking for a place where what I knew how to do was worth something." "It is," he said. "Here, it is." She looked at him. Not the inventory assessment look from the depot. Not the focused, reading a document look from the table. Something else. The look of a person arriving somewhere after a very long road and allowing themselves, cautiously, to recognize it as a destination. "All right," she said. He didn't move. All right meaning yes, she said. "I'll stay. I want to stay." A beat. "Don't make me say it more than once." "I won't," he said. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. Her grip was firm, the same grip he'd registered the first moment she'd taken his hand in the depot. The grip of a woman who understood that a handshake was a document too. Binding, legible, serious. They held on. Thursday came clear and cold, with the smell of coming winter on the air. The investigator's name was Connell, a lean man from Santa Fe with a briefcase and a territorial marshal's badge, and the patient, thorough manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that a case built carefully was the only kind that held. He arrived on the morning stage, and Walt met him at the depot, and Meg was already there beside Walt when the stage pulled in, because she had not been asked to stay back, and had not stayed back. Connell looked at the documents for 2 hours at Dorothy Yancey's table. Dorothy had offered her back room without being asked, on the grounds that it was better than the land office, and nowhere near the land office. And he asked questions with the focused brevity of a man who already understood what he was looking at, and was confirming rather than discovering. When he was done, he looked at Meg. "You compiled this," he said. "I organized it," she said. "The evidence belonged to the ranchers. I just knew how to read it." Connell looked at Walt. "You filed the complaint." "She wrote it," Walt said. "I signed it." Connell looked at both of them for a moment, with the expression of a man recalibrating something. Then he closed his briefcase. "I'm going to need both of you available as witnesses when this goes to a hearing. That could be weeks out, possibly longer." "We're not going anywhere," Walt said. Connell went to see Pruitt that afternoon. Walt heard about it from Dorothy, who heard it from the postmistress, who had been next door and heard raised voices through the shared wall. First Pruitt's, loud and controlled, and then a longer silence, and then Connell's, which was not loud at all, which was its own kind of louder. Pruitt's office stayed dark the next morning, and the morning after that. On the third day, a buckboard left the back of the land office before dawn, with Pruitt's personal furniture and 2 trunks, and the man driving it was not Coe, but a hired hand, who told the stable boy only that he'd been paid to drive to Las Cruces and ask no questions. Coe disappeared from Cartero entirely. The acting county clerk, a young woman named Anita Reyes, who had worked under Pruitt for 3 years and had kept her head down and her own counsel throughout, opened the land office that Friday and began the process of pulling every file from 1878 forward. Meg was there when she opened. She had the ledgers under her arm and a list of the ranchers affected in her inside pocket, and Anita Reyes looked at her across the counter with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for someone to walk through that door and start this particular work. "I know the files," Anita said. "I know which ones he touched." "Then let's start," Meg said. They worked for 4 days straight, Meg and Anita, and eventually Edwin Aldridge, who came in the second day and sat at the back table and went through his own records with the methodical patience of a man who had never been in a fight he chose and wasn't going to lose this one. By the end of the week, 11 properties had been identified, 8 tax records corrected, 3 boundary surveys scheduled for re-examination using Briggs's original field notes. Robert Holt's estate was reviewed last. His land, the correct parcel, 22A, valued at market, was transferred to the public trust pending identification of distant family. Connell took that file himself back to Santa Fe, with a separate notation in his report about the circumstances of Holt's death and the recommendation that the matter be reviewed by the territorial attorney. Walt drove Meg home from the land office on the 4th evening. The sun was going down red over the mesa, and the air had the cold clarity of a night that would have stars. She sat beside him on the wagon seat with her hands loose in her lap, not holding anything for the first time in days, and he could see the weariness in her, the way you see it in someone when they finally stop holding it back. "You should sleep," he said. "I'm going to sleep," she said, "for a very long time." Good. The ranch came into view. The cabin, the barn, the corral with the mare, the cottonwood going bare now with October's end. The light was off, but the shape of it was familiar and solid against the sky. The shape of something that had been fought for and was still standing. Walt pulled the mare up in front of the porch and set the brake. Neither of them moved for a moment, the kind of moment that earns its stillness. "Walt," Meg said. "Yeah?" "Thank you for coming across that platform." He looked at her. The last light was on her face, and her eyes were the gray of iron left in rain, the same as the first moment he'd seen her. But what was in them now was entirely different. Not assessment, not caution, not the careful cracking open of a door. Something decided. Something chosen. "You'd have managed without me," he said. "Probably," she said, "but I didn't have to." He helped her down from the wagon, and they went inside together. And he built up the fire while she made coffee, moving around the cabin with the ease of two people who have learned each other's rhythms without making a study of it. She poured both cups and set his on the table where he always sat, and she sat across from him and wrapped her hands around her cup and looked at him across the lamplight. "The creditor's claim against Holt's estate," she said. "The fence repair you invented to get us legal standing to request the documents." "The fence was real," he said. "Robert owed me $40. She looked at him. "Was it?" "I extended him credit in May," Walt said. "He paid me back in June. I wrote it off." A pause. "But it was a real debt at the time." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the thing that happens in a face just before one. "You bent the truth to get us in the door." "I used a true thing strategically," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I know. That's why I didn't correct you when you said it." He picked up his cup. So did she. They drank in the warmth of the cabin, in the quiet of a night that held no threat anymore, just the ordinary sounds of the prairie settling into cold. Wind in the cottonwood, a coyote far off, the mare shifting in the corral. "The eastern 40 acres, Meg said. "You'll want to run a proper assessment now that the record's corrected." "I will," he said. "You'll help me." "Yes," she said. "I will." He looked at her across the table, across the ledgers that had started all of this, across the space between two people who had come to the same place from very different distances and found, against the long odds of grief and failure, and the particular stubbornness required to keep going anyway, that the place was large enough for both of them. The fire held. The lamp held. Outside, winter was coming in the way it came to New Mexico territory, without asking, without apology, with the full intention of staying. But inside the cabin there was warmth and coffee and two people who had stopped being strangers to each other in the most fundamental way. Not through declaration, but through the slow, irreversible accumulation of shared work and shared risk, and the kind of trust that is only built in motion. Margaret Calloway had come west with 43 cents and a trunk full of documents, looking for a place where what she knew how to do was worth something. She had found it, and she had made it hers, and she was not leaving.